Soul Mom Talks was created as a space where women could rise, not by being perfect, but by being real.
It's a place where stories are honored, voices are amplified, and we remember that when one mom heals, she gives permission for another to do the same.
Every woman you'll hear from today has shown up with courage. They're committed to inner work, have stepped through fear, and said yes to being able to be seen, not just for themselves, but for those who need to hear their stories.
These speakers didn't arrive here by accident. They chose growth, they chose elevation, they chose to rise into their truth, and today they're here to lift others as they rise.
Each story you'll hear carries wisdom, vulnerability, and light. And as they elevate themselves on the stage, they're also here to inspire you to remember your own power.
Because Soul Mom Talks isn't just about listening, it's about awakening something within you.
So we invite you to be present, to open your heart, to receive whatever message is meant for you today. Welcome to Soul Mom Talks,
Where mothers rise,
stories heal,
and light is shared. Taslim Samji. Taslim Samji is a cultural authority. Is a cultural authority, multidisciplinary artist, author, and community facilitator whose work explores identity, immigration, and intergenerational healing. Through storytelling, art, and dialogue, she creates spaces where lived experience is honored and belonging is reclaimed. She is the author of Undervalued Brown Girl's Guide to Finding Your Worth and a co-author of Be Light to Raise Light, and a powerful voice in conscious parenting and community healing. As a mother, curator, and guide, Taslim's work is both deeply lived and profoundly impactful. She will be speaking about the identity gap. Please welcome Taslim Samji to the Soul Mom Talk stage.
I am honored to be here with all of you today. I want to be upfront and honest. I don't know how to be a perfect parent, and I don't have the blueprint to share with you. What I do want to do today is have an honest conversation about identity. The identity we grew up with, the identity our parents carried, the identity that we had placed on us or were given, and the identity that our children are now discovering for themselves in a completely different time. I'm a Gen X, and most of you have probably heard the Gen X line that says, when the streetlights came on, we went home. And for a long time, I thought, yeah, that fits. And then I remembered, I grew up in an immigrant household. A few months of the year, when the street lights synced up to 6:30, I was like every other kid. But the truth is, the street lights didn't matter. 6:30 mattered, because that's the time my parents came home from work. And I had to make sure that I was home before them. And I had to also make sure that the house was clean, especially the kitchen. Both of my parents worked long hours as immigrants. And when my mom got home, she had additional responsibilities waiting for her, including making dinner. And if I was late, my parents questioned me, and then I was scolded. And as I grew up, when I went to high school, I was late sometimes. My commute back and forth from high school was far. And sometimes I was late because of school activities and sports. But still, that had to be negotiated. My parents were protective, honestly overprotective. And they didn't trust the world. They were scared. They were immigrants. They came to Canada in the 70s, and they experienced a huge culture shock. Life was so different here than it was in East Africa. And so they were trying to keep me safe. So sometimes, often, safety meant home, and structure meant control. And being a good girl meant that I was acceptable and that I had to keep my reputation in check. And that did something to me. It made me careful, it made me aware, but it also made me hyper-aware. And it made me feel small. And I knew that it was safer to be small. And so there was so much love in my childhood growing up, but there was also fear and there was control. And that tension between care and control, that is where identity quietly starts to form. And if you don't have the language for that care and control, that difference, you don't think this is conditioning. You don't think that this is culture. You think this is my family. This is normal. This is home. And I want to talk about something, because this is such a diverse audience, I want to talk about something that seems small, but really it isn't. And that's names. My name is Taslim, pronounced Tas-Lim. The T is soft. And growing up, people didn't know how to say it. Sometimes they hesitated. Sometimes I tried to make it easier for them, so I accepted whatever version came from them. And my mom, with all the love in the world, was trying to make me feel like I belonged, managed to butcher my already mispronounced name. And hearing your name mispronounced over and over, pronounced differently over and over, does something to you. It's a reminder that you're different. And the difficulty here is that it changes you. You know, as your name shifts, is pronounced differently, the environment shifts. It adjusts. It adjusts. And then you start adjusting. And that's the identity gap, the difference between who you are and who the world expects you to be. And I feel that I have a good understanding of how identity is different across generations because I spent a lot of time with my ma, with my paternal grandmother. And one day I asked her, "Ma, were there phones when you were little?" And she looked at me, kind of insulted, because my ma thought she was very modern. Sometimes she wore pants, and sometimes, well, religiously, she watched All My Children. That's how she learned English. And she said to me, "Of course we had phones when I was little." And so then I asked her, "So you had a phone in your house?" And she said, she looked at me hard and she said, "No," in Gujarati, which is the language we spoke together. And she said, "Those were for rich people." And that moment stayed with me. It told me something, that her sense of identity, her normal was based on access and class and time. Now, my parents had phones, but if you received a phone call when they were younger, it must have been serious. Phone calls were intentional. And if you picked up the phone and said hello, somebody would say hello back. If that happened today, you'd trip out. But nothing was automated. And when I was a kid, having a cordless phone, that was awesome. Because now I could have private conversations without my parents listening and make plans and maybe talk to boys. But nobody had a big phone, a cell phone. If you had a cell phone, it was big. It was like a brick. It was the kind that Zach Morris had on Saved by the Bell. And good luck putting that in your pocket. And some young people had pagers, but unless you were a doctor, if you had a pager, my family, and it was commonly believed that, you know, it was related to something nefarious like drugs. And now there are kids. Our kids today, cell phone in their pocket, constant access, constant exposure, different world, different identity pressures. I mean, how else can you explain 10-year-olds heading to the beauty counter to get anti-aging products? As a brown girl Gen X, I often think about my life and my childhood in terms of fairy tales. So the fairy tale that comes to mind is Jack and the Beanstalk. So I'm a Gen X. We're the beans. So we were given food, shelter, and some safety, and then we were just thrown out in the world to grow. Very little instruction, very little emotional nurturing. And you know how they say if you talk to your plants, they grow? Well, we weren't talked to, we were talked at, and that's a very different thing. And then there's Jack. Jack had to be careful. Jack had to stay small. Jack had to use his wits. Being seen wasn't always safe. And so we learned when to talk, when to stay quiet, and when to adapt. And right there is resilience. Not the romantic kind, the survival kind. And like many of you, I have thought that what if I had a blueprint that I could share with my kids? The blueprint that we saw in hindsight. The blueprint that says maybe it could have been different. But the blueprint didn't come first. Resilience came first. Resilience is our badge of honor. We need it today as parents. And if we know how important resilience is, then why would we take that away from our children? They need it more today than ever before. Not our versions, not our exact lessons. They need to build their own resilience. And this is the hard part. And it's heartbreaking. Building resilience, it can be painful. It can be traumatic. So our role is not to add weight to the load that our children are already carrying. Our children are not extensions of ourselves. They are their own beings. And our job is not to shape them, but it's to stand beside them as they discover who they are, grounding them, loving them, creating safety. In closing, I want to share a small practice with you because life is hard, parenting is hard, and we all have that one thing that feels stuck. Maybe you have more. But let's pick one thing. And don't dive into it, just one thing, and name it. And now imagine that you are in a room and there is a window there. And there is that thing we named. Now go to the window, open the window, and as you open it, ask, could this be different? And as you open the window, even a crack, you can feel this breeze coming in. That's grace. That's it. Come back to the room, come back to this space, to this moment. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do as humans, as parents, is to stop insisting that we already know how the story ends. Thank you.